Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Russ Thomas, and I'm the CEO of the Prostate Forum of Orange County. It is our pleasure tonight to bring to you one of the highly regarded speakers that we provide for your information pleasure the fourth Thursday of every month.
There you go. Which is akin to doing intensity-modulated X-rays, but we're doing this with protons now. We're actually, as you're going to see, we're shaping the beam entirely electromagnetically. So those of you who may have been treated at LU or some of the other centers around the country where we had to make those physical devices to shape the beam, the wax bolus and stuff, that's all become a data file, which has a lot of advantages to it, not the least of which is that if the room you're being treated in goes down, we can move you to the room next door because we just put the data file into the machine next door. And as far as the computer that runs the show is concerned, all these rooms are the same. But fundamentally, when you're talking about radiation therapy and proton therapy, it doesn't matter. You really can't understand why we want to use protons until you understand the differences between protons and X-rays. I remind people, particularly physicians, all the time, that this is not magic, it's applied physics. X-rays were discovered in 1895. The Bragg peak, which is the phenomena by which protons and other heavy charged particles will drop their dose at a particular point and not go beyond that point, was discovered in 1903. So over a century ago, this fundamental physical property was discovered. And in essence, what we're doing now, just like what we do in X-ray therapy, is we exploit that physics. And the reason we want to do this is because we've learned the hard way that it's not what we can give to the cancer that does the job. We can give whatever dose we want. It's what we can get away with. It's normal tissue that limits what I can do, limits what any of us can do with radiation. If you start hurting normal tissue, and you will at some point, that sets the dose limit. So it's always a compromise between what you want to give the bad stuff and what the good stuff will tolerate. And the other thing, of course, that most people are aware of is that radiation has a long follow-on. It is the gift that keeps on giving, and you hear a lot of radiation oncologists saying, well, that's important in kids, and important in young adults, and blah, blah, blah. It's important in guys in their 60s, 70s, and 80s because you have this nasty habit of living for a while. And radiation side effects often may not show up for 10 to 15 years. And the simplest way to keep them from happening is you just don't treat something. That's no secret. If I don't radiate somebody's heart, if I'm treating a breast cancer or lymphoma patient, I can't cause radiation-induced cardiotoxicity. And if you remember anything from tonight, it's this. We use protons because they stop. X-rays don't stop. When you have X-ray therapy, which is very, very good treatment, we were using higher power versions of the same X-rays that we use to take X-ray pictures. And if you think about how an X-ray picture is acquired, the beam has to pass all the way through you to create an image. When we use therapy energy X-rays, the same thing occurs. They go all the way through you, skin to skin. Now you can play with the fluence of the beam and reduce some of the entrance dose, but you can't eliminate it. With protons, because they will stop where you want them to stop, you can vastly reduce the radiation dose of the normal tissue. Like the example I give here, for typical prostate plans, you're looking at a total radiation dose to the patient of around 3 to 4 times less than with X-rays. Is that clinically important? Well, who's volunteers for more? If I want more, we want to give you more radiation than normal tissue. It's difficult to quantify this sometimes, but there really isn't, you can't perceive a benefit of spraying radiation through somebody's pelvis if the target you're treating is the prostate. And for the physics whizzes out there, this is the diagram. You can't go to a proton talk and not show. It just shows that if you bring a proton beam in, especially an intensity-modulated one, the radiation dose to the skin surface is very low. You build up the dose to 100% at some user-defined depth. The particles then come to a stop. The dose drops to 0. X-ray beams are different. When they enter the person, the maximal dose is typically at a depth of about 1.5 to 2 centimeters. And then there's this exponential decrease of dose all the way through the patient and out the other side. The gentleman who thought this up, who popularized this, 1946, July 1946, Robert R. Wilson, fascinating individual. He was a physicist that was the youngest section head. He was the youngest section head at Los Alamos during the war. And he realized that these special properties of protons would make them ideal for cancer treatment. Part of it, too, was that he was working on this, and he wanted to keep, having had the chance to meet the gentleman, because he died in 2001, he said, look, I wanted to leave a legacy of something else besides the work I did on Little Boy. His position at Los Alamos was actually eventually to run Oak Ridge, what became Oak Ridge, and he was responsible for most of the U-235 that went into Little Boy. A little bit more on him because he's a fascinating guy. That's the name of the town he was born in, Frontier, Wyoming. He trained up at Berkeley, got his PhD with Ernest Lawrence, the inventor of the cyclotron. After the war, he went back into academics. He was a faculty at Cornell for most of his academic life. He was the founding director of Fermilab, the U.S. premier physics laboratory out in Illinois. He was a sculptor. This is one of the 15-ton sculptures he did that's out there at Fermilab. And he and his wife are actually buried at Fermilab. So they're just a fascinating individual. He writes this paper in 1946. Yeah, that's great. The only problem is this is about 30 years before CT scans and other things. But about 10 years later, in the late 50s, they thought at Harvard, let's give it a shot. Let's try treating some pituitary tumors with protons. So they did these things to figure out ways to get people into a cyclotron and treat their head. Great. You treat one or two at a time. Does this look like Frankenstein's lab? Yeah. Would you want to do this every day? Of course not. You couldn't. But they did enough to show that it was feasible and that there were advantages to it. And then along comes 1990, when the Loma Linda facility was finished. And the difference with Loma Linda, before Loma Linda was built, all proton therapy, and there have been several thousand patients treated, was performed at Los Alamos, Berkeley, the Stedborg Laboratory in Uppsala, which is outside of Stockholm, etc., all physics labs. The former chairman at Loma Linda, Dr. James Slater, is the father of the current chairman. He wanted a proton facility in a medical environment, and he raised heaven and earth to get it. And what you had was this design, which virtually all follow-on facilities have followed, where you have a single accelerator, either a synchrotron or a cyclotron, and it serves multiple rooms. And it's in a medical setting. It's designed to treat patients. So now you can treat 100 plus patients a day and not one or two and then have to tear the machine apart. The way that most proton therapy has been done until about 2004, 2005, and really until 4 or 5 years ago, was a system called passive scatter. That's where you take a little beam of protons and run it through some physical devices to shape the dose so it's all stopping just beyond the target. Beginning in 2004, at a facility in Switzerland, a Swiss national lab called the Paul Scherrer Institute, they came up with this idea of active beam scanning, where you take that little beam of protons, in the case of our facility at Scripps, it's 4.5 millimeters in diameter, and in essence you use it, you move it with electromagnets, and you paint whatever target you want to treat. It's like a 3D printer building a solid object. Lets you get a lot more creative. I'm going to show you some slides on that. There's much, much, much more you can do with this system than we could do in the past. It lets you do all sorts of cool things. So we no longer have these familiar looking devices. To some of you, these are the tissue compensators and beam shapers that we would use at Loma Linda and most proton centers still use. That's all a data file. So I want to give you an idea of what a pencil beam can actually do if I can get the darn animation to run. Let's see, hopefully. Do that. I think of pencil beam proton therapy as being very precise, and you'll see why. It's very beneficial because it now lets you use protons to treat virtually everything we would treat with x-rays in the past. So we treat lung cancer, we treat breast cancer, we treat pediatrics, you name it. And I do think there's some superior technology to what I did for 20 plus years. And if I can get this, hopefully, come on. It always runs when I do it on my laptop and doesn't want to seem to run here, but if I could get this to go, what I was going to show you is we actually use the pencil beam to write scripts in a logo, and just to give you an idea how fast it goes in real time. Anyway, to take my word for it. The machine itself, the rooms that we treat with are pretty similar to what you may have seen in Loma Linda. Some of the modifications. We use completely robotic couches in all the rooms that are moved by the computer, 6 degrees of freedom. We have isocentric gantries that can treat from any angle. We also have some different imaging systems than I had at LAU. We use a system called cone beam CT, which is built into the gantry to image the patient in near real time, and then that information is fed back into this table for positioning. Because you've got this precise beam, and if you can't hit the target, it doesn't do you a lot of good. And what cone beam lets you do is it lets you get a three-dimensional picture of the patient every day right before you treat them, and you use that for your targeting. This data actually is a little bit out of date now. I was looking at some stuff this morning. The number of cases of prostate cancer that were diagnosed in, I think, 2014 was down to about 161,000. And it's not because prostate cancer suddenly stopped occurring, it's just because of this effort to not do screening, which I think is going to turn around and bite us in the derriere in the not too distant future. But there were still 26,000 deaths in 2014 from it. The median age, and we know it's an age, is 70. That's not a surprise. There are certainly questions you can raise about who does and does not need to be treated. A lot of it depends upon what you really think is going on in terms of the aggressiveness of the cancer, and most importantly, is it going to continue to behave that way for the foreseeable future? And that's where a lot of the debate swirls. But in my mind, if we have effective treatments, we should at least be offering them to patients. If you talk about proton therapy specifically of prostate cancer, it also goes back to the late 1970s. First patients that were treated at Harvard, the Harvard cyclotron, were treated in 1977. The first paper was written in 1979, so I was a junior in high school then. But they were very limited in what they could do because they were, once again, using a machine never designed to treat people. So they just used protons to do a boost. Patients got most of their treatment with x-rays, and they used protons to try to give a higher dose to the prostate gland. It was a proof of concept study. And then over the next 10, 12, 13 years, they did this randomized trial between protons and one dose and x-rays, but it took forever because you're using a machine that was never designed to treat people. They wrote about this in the mid-1990s, and in essence they said, yeah, the higher doses were better in some cases. It didn't change whether the patients had a better outcome in terms of cure because these were all guys that had really advanced disease, stage T4. None of them received hormonal therapy. Most died of distant metastasis, but it was a proof of concept. At Loma Linda, we started treating prostate patients. The first day was October 8, 1991, and essentially what we did initially was just duplicate the Harvard experience in a big way. And one of our first publications that came out in the late 90s looked at about 1,200 plus gentlemen that we treated, and they were treated with just radiation alone, no surgery, no hormonal therapy. We wanted to see how they did over time, and this was a pretty homogeneous, or heterogeneous group, I should say, of patients. And their overall freedom from relapse at 10 years or so was about 70+%. Remember, you've got everything in here from low risk to intermediate and high risk, so not bad. And equally important, when you looked at the side effects, well, these are late side effects, like anything after 3 months. What you worry about are things in this column. Grade 3, grade 4, those are issues that require surgical correction or they require some major change in lifestyle to fix. And the rate was well under 1%, which is very, very low. It's not zero, right? You can still hurt people with protons, but it was well below the 5% threshold, which is generally felt to be the upper limit of acceptability for these type of problems. We then proceeded with Mass General to do a randomized trial, which I like randomized studies, which are next to impossible to do, by the way, in people. And the purpose of this was to see if by giving a higher radiation dose and using protons to give that higher dose, we had better outcomes. So we involved just under 400 patients. Here's the way it worked. And in essence, half of them got 8 weeks of treatment, half got 9 weeks. Everybody got x-ray therapy to 50 gray. So most of the treatment was actually done with x-rays, and that was done so that Harvard could participate, because they couldn't do the entire treatment then with protons. And this is the way that they had to deliver their protons at Harvard. Let me get back to that, not very elegant. They actually had to put the patients, have them sit on the nozzle. I don't know if you can see that. And the beam came in right through the perineum, right from the skin on up, because their beam wasn't powerful enough at their old facility to come in from the sides like we did at Loma Linda and like we typically do now. The nice thing about this is that you miss most of the rectum and the bladder by using lateral fields. They couldn't do that because their machine didn't allow it to be done. Anyway, again, to cut to the quick on all this, When we looked at the results over time, and the last publication on this was 2010, so hopefully they're getting ready to do another one, what we found was that the patients who got the higher dose of radiation, there was a 12.5% difference between the arms, not a big difference, had a difference in their freedom from biochemical failure. So the dashed line is the high dose, the solid line is what was the standard dose of the day. This was 79.2 gray, that's 70.2. The curves separate, they separate around 3 years, and even though they're still dropping a little bit at a decade, you can see there's a pretty big difference between the two, favoring those who got the higher dose. And we found this when we looked at every subgroup. We looked at the low-risk guys. We saw the same thing, about a 20+% improvement in outcome at 10 years. And we saw it in the intermediate risk patients. And equally importantly, despite the fact that we gave a higher dose, we didn't see an increase in toxicity. That was the other concern, is that you're given higher doses, you're more likely to hurt people. We didn't see that. We did a comparison and follow-on between the folks who got the high-dose radiation and protons and those who got brachytherapy, seed implant done at Mass General. And we found, not surprisingly, that the outcomes in terms of disease control look like they're virtually the same. Because the cancer cells don't care where the dose comes from, what they care about is how hard you slug them. And brachytherapy is a good way, among many good ways, to deliver high-dose radiation. I'm going to kind of skip to the next few slides because they're talking about some of the more recent stuff from the University of Florida. Just in the interest of time, I'll tell you, they have done a number of trials at University of Florida looking at different dose per fraction plans and looking at, in essence, if they're able to, in some cases, give chemotherapy. They're actually giving docetaxel chemotherapy during radiation. And what they found is that they can, first of all, treat their patients with minimal, remember that grade 3, I said you want to keep it below 5%, theirs is less than 0.5%, with minimal toxicity. And if you look at their outcomes, they're as good as anything else which is out there published, which is not a surprise. Prostate cancer is very curable if it's confined to the prostate. There are a lot of good ways to cure it, high-dose radiation being one of them. Right now, there are well over 100 proton clinical trials going on in the United States. You just go to clinicaltrials.gov and put in protons, you'll come up with a bunch, of which about 15 or 16 are prostate trials. When you figure that there are now 26 operating proton centers in the US, it's a pretty good research effort versus the 3,000 plus places that do X-ray therapy. We're doing a lot of work to try to quantify what's best, including some of the stuff we're doing now in the scripts. And everybody, when they talk about studies, says, oh, we want you guys have heard, I'm sure, there's no randomized data on protons versus X-rays. Oh, yeah, you're right, there really isn't, for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it's hard to get people to agree to be randomized to get more radiation. But what a lot of physicians don't realize is that the vast majority of treatments we perform in oncology, not just prostate, breast, lung, GI, etc., are not based on prospective randomized trials. In fact, that prospective randomized trial is the least likely thing to occur. If you guys are familiar with NCCN, National Comprehensive Cancer Network, they have all these levels of evidence from, hey, we all agree, uniform consensus, to, hey, where there's a lot of disagreement. Well, some smart cookie from University of Maryland a couple years ago went out and looked at the 10 most common cancers in the US. Of course, this font I can barely see, so I'm going to take that word. It's breast, prostate, lung, etc. And he said, I want to look in the NCCN guidelines and look at their recommendations and see what percentage of the recommendation, for example, the treatments for breast cancer is based on level 1 evidence. Breast cancer is the leader, 8%. So 92% of the things we recommend in breast cancer treatment are not based on prospective randomized trials. Prostate, it's about 4%. But I put these in here because you hear this a lot. Oh, you've got to do a prospective randomized study. If we limit ourselves to that, we wouldn't do anything. We wouldn't know anything. You wouldn't. You have to look at other sources of data. We can do patient comparisons. We can do other things that are not randomized, and we can learn from that. And you see this across the board when you look at some of the recommendations. And again, I don't want to dig into those too deeply, but it's there that people talk about this need for high-level data, which is almost impossible to get, and they act like we can't learn anything from things that may be 1 or 2 rungs down the ladder. When you're talking about radiation therapy trials too, there's some things to keep in mind. This is a quote from Herman Suit. He was the former chairman at Mass General. He gave a lecture back in 2001, which has gotten a lot of publicity over the years. And the first thing he says, look, there is no advantage to radiating healthy tissue. And like I said earlier, there's nothing to be gained by it. There's only potentially something that'll be lost by doing it. So if you didn't have to do it, you wouldn't do it. And if you look at everything we've done in radiation therapy, where we use these strategies to be more precise, they've been beneficial across the board. We're not seeing cases where we're missing disease. We're seeing that sparing normal tissue is always a benefit. And it's not a research question to see if reducing radiation to the normal tissue is a good idea. We already know it's toxic. So that's not what you're looking at. What you're trying to do is quantify, if you can, what is the magnitude of the gain? Not is there a gain, but how much of a gain is it? 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? That's what you're doing, or should be doing, when you do radiation studies. There was a paper that was published a few years ago looking at protons versus IMRT. This also got a lot of press. It came from a group at University of North Carolina, where they mined a Medicare database, and they said, oh, if you have a Medicare billing code in your file saying you went to the GI doctor after you had radiation with protons, you must have had toxicity. And their conclusion was there was no difference between protons and IMRT. It's not very scientifically valid to do that. They didn't realize, among other things, that every patient that we saw at Loma Linda who had rectal bleeding, whether it was from a hemorrhoid or from something else, we said, you go to the GI doctor and get it worked up. Again, I want to skip ahead to some of the cooler stuff that we're doing. So let me tell you a bit about our place. At the time that Scripps opened, and this is still true, we were the only facility at the time we opened that was built from the ground up to be totally without passive scatter, to only be able to treat with intensity-modulated protons. So we can't put boluses in our nozzles, we can't put apertures, we don't need to. Virtually every center that's opened since we opened in February 2014 has been built with the same equipment. Maybe not the same vendor, but the same pencil beam scanning equipment. So we opened in February 2014. The two Mayo Clinic centers opened the next year. They're both pencil beam scanning only. University of Maryland opened up in February this year, pencil beam scanning only. Cincinnati Children's, St. Jude's, etc. It is the way that we're going here in the future. And our facility is laid out like the Loma Linda diagram, like most places are. We have the imaging center where we do all of our patient imaging for planning and follow-up. So we have MRI, CT, and CT PET in that part of the building. We have the clinic, which is on the first floor here. And then we have the treatment block, which is where all the 5 treatment rooms are. The cyclotron sits in the corner. We have 3 gantries and 2 fixed beam rooms. Fortunately, at least I think it's fortunate, we're above ground. So I no longer work 20 feet underground, which is nice. We have windows, which is also nice. And we have a single cyclotron that serves all 5 rooms. And you treat in sequence. There isn't a place yet in the world that can treat more than 1 room at a time because you're modulating the beam specifically for that patient in those rooms. But what you do, of course, is you have patients ready to be treated, and you treat in this room, and then when this person is finished, you bring the beam over here, and you bring somebody else in here, get them lined up and ready to go. That's how you have a high patient throughput. About 10% of our patient load is pediatrics. We work with Rady Children's Hospital, which is the largest children's hospital in California. They have affiliations with CHOC and CHLA, etc. As a consequence, we have an anesthesia area for the kids because about half the kids we treat, we have to treat under general anesthesia to get the precision that we need. If you're moving around, we're not going to hit the target. The cyclotron that we use as a particle accelerator is superconducting, so it's very small. It's just over 3 meters in diameter. It weighs 95 tons, and it accelerates particles to approximately 60% of the speed of light. And that's an energy that gives you a penetration of about close to 1 meter in a person. This is a picture that was taken when the cyclotron was being lowered into the building back in late 2011. They built this in Germany and shipped it to the US and then trucked it over here from Port Hueneme, put it down in the building. Give you an idea what the front of the building looks like now. Everything's completed in landscaping and stuff. Shot the lobby. And this is a little better picture of one of the patient treatment rooms. That's at least I was trying to show that in the animation, but this is the real deal. So you can see the robot, how it extends out into space. This is a patient we're treating a primary brain tumor. This nozzle here is the scanning nozzle. So the protons would be coming out the nozzle like this, and as the proton beam is scanned in an XY fashion with the magnets that are in the nozzle. These things you see sticking out of the side of the nozzle, those are imagers that capture X-ray image. So this thing you see sticking out here, this is one of the X-ray tubes that we use to image the patient in real time. There's another one that's kind of buried down here in the floor. This entire frame can rotate through 360 degrees. The gantries weigh 280 plus tons, and they can be pointed to within less than 1/10 of a degree. It's quite an engineering marvel. That's the little picture I took of the pediatric recovery room with the 3 beds in it. The way that we plan patients for intensity-modulated proton therapy is the same way you plan them for X-ray therapy. You have to get a 3-dimensional model of the target. So we do all sorts of imagery to create that. We do the same physics constraints that we would use for X-ray therapy, same prescription. We treat virtually everybody in the supine position. We use the rectal balloon, though the one we're using is actually a commercially manufactured one. We use a commercial planning system by Varian to do the calculations, etc. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having multimodality imaging. And by that I mean not just CT to rely upon. I mean CT and MRI, multiparametric MRI. And in many cases, C11 PET, or now I'm starting to see some gallium-68 PSMA PETs and F18 Oxman scans. You get a better picture, I'm going to show you that, if you have more than one imaging modality to look at. And in particular, with the pencil beam, if you want to boost something within the gland, and you can often see things you want to hit harder, you can put that right in your prescription. And every day when you're treating the patient, that area can get 20% more, 50% more, whatever you want. We're spoiled, I think I'm spoiled, because I've got all this stuff sitting in the building. I've got a CT, multiparametric MR, and also got CT PET. CT is good at showing you bone, and the computer needs that to know where to stop, how to calculate the protons are going to stop. MRI shows you soft tissue, it shows you the real borders of the prostate, and it shows you that intraprostatic disease. So if you're looking at just a CT only, a pretty common picture, this is a little bit of the bladder, this is the prostate here, and this is the rectum. But, you know, where does the prostate really stop? There's some tissue that's immediately adjacent to it. Are those blood vessels, or is that part of the prostate gland? If you now take the same patient, and this is the same patient, and you do a multiparametric MRI with them in the same position, you say, aha, look, you can see the gland very, very well. It's this thing here. And oh, by the way, what's that? Huh, looks different, huh? You don't see, this is the peripheral zone of the gland on the right. You don't see it on the left. This was his primary tumor. There it is. You go back and look at that CAT scan. Where is it? You don't know. You don't know. You can't see it. The MR lets you see it. And if you can see it, I've got it, give you an arrow pointing at it, it means you can be sure you're hitting it, and you can hit it even harder. We also, in the multiparametric part of the MR, means you do a lot of different sequences to bring this stuff out. So, same patient, this is what's called the parent diffusion sequence, and you see again that black hole, which corresponds with what I showed you on the previous slide, and confirms that what we're looking at there is an intermediate to high-grade lesion. And so then when you contour, draw that out and treat it, you not only outline the entire prostate, you outline that area or areas. You say to the computer when you write your prescription, hit that harder. Just like you also say the things you want to spare, the penile bulb and neurovascular bundles, hit them less. With the pencil beam, you can carve them out and reduce the radiation dose to normal tissue. A lot of this planning I'm able to do pretty much anywhere using actually this laptop, and you can do things like this and fascinate your I think this really happened. I was on stage, kid you not. This is a 25-pound Maine Coon cat, and she was kind of fascinated with the planning, but eventually she got not too fascinated with it. But you do it all, here you can do it. I've done plans overseas, you name it. Let's show you some pictures of what we actually are able to do, some examples. So this is just a pretty straightforward one here. We're using left and right lateral beams, building up the dose in the prostate. This patient did not have a dominant nodule, so there's no area being built up inside the gland. but you've got high dose on the target, and then this area blue is about 10% dose. Once you get beyond the edges of the color, the dose is 0. So are you treating normal tissue? Oh, absolutely. You can't miss this stuff. But what you're missing is all the interior contents. And if you look at the patient cut right down the middle, what you're not seeing is radiation up here at this part of the bladder, in the intestines, in the sacrum, coccyx, etc. You're sparing all of that. Just a little closer view of of the same pictures. You can see the same thing. And to give you an idea of the difference between, say, doing this with protons, this is a patient we're treating the pelvic lymph nodes as well with IMPT versus very good X-ray therapy, what's called VMAT or volumetric arc X-ray therapy. The difference is not the dose to the prostate, the difference is all this overspray. And again, if you look at the patient cut right down the middle, you can see here I'm treating the prostate, I'm treating some of the nodes in front of the sacrum. If you did that with VMAT, you can do exactly the same thing. You're going to have dose from skin to skin. I mentioned earlier that this machine is very capable. I no longer have to split treatments between protons and X-rays because I'm able to do it all. If I want to treat the pelvis, I can treat the pelvic nodes with protons. The machine will generate a big enough field to allow me to do that. I was showing you guys slides of this earlier. This is another multi-parametric MR where we're outlining a dominant nodule. In this case, it was on the left. We incorporated that into the treatment plan, so you can see the nodule incorporated with the rest of the prostate, and we just used that in our treatment plan, to deliver, in this case, it was about a 20% higher dose per day just to that area without simply increasing the radiation dose to the entire gland. So even though this area is getting a 20% higher dose, the radiation dose to the rectum isn't any different because we're just putting the dose in that one small region. And this is looking at the same patient as if they're cut right down the middle. This is that dominant nodule here, and the rest of the prostate. And you see the dose, this is the 100% isodose line, surrounds the gland nicely, doesn't bulge back into the rectum, because we're being very specific as to where we put that little bit of extra dose. Patients who have more advanced disease, here's a gentleman that it's a little bit fuzzy, but if you look at his MRI, the entire right peripheral zone is occupied by tumor. That's why it's dark versus the more normal appearance are on the left. And I'm saying left and right because when you look at these scans, you're looking from the feet up. So that's why the images are reversed. But it doesn't matter. You can outline that area, just like you can with the smaller area. And you can build that into your treatment plan as well, to where we're, again, boosting this dominant nodule while we're treating the entire gland with really minimal impact on the remainder of the normal structures that are there in the pelvis. This is an example of a field plan I use to treat the pelvic nodes and the prostate. This is the nodal portion of it. It's a 3-field technique, a posterior and opposed laterals. And what you're doing in effect is creating a U. So you're putting high dose around the nodes, and you're sparing the tissues in the center, the majority of the bladder. That's something you cannot do with X-rays. This would be an impossible plan. You could treat the nodes, but you'd be treating the entire bladder as well. If you look at that patient cut down the middle, again, you see dose of the prostate, you see dose of the nodes. You don't see any dose up here to the intestine or the bladder because you're stopping the particles before they ever get to that point. Now, one of the other nice things that's been happening, of course, is that not only is radiation not sat still, that some of the ancillary tools that we use have also been not sitting still. Many of you have heard of the space OAR. It's a hydrogel that's injected into the potential space between the prostate and the rectum to move the rectum out of the radiation field. That's what this white blob is. This was the first patient that we had who had the space replaced. So you can see his bladder, prostate, the spacer, which shows up very nicely on MR, and the rectum. And guess what? No balloon. We don't need it now. The balloon is to displace the rectum away from the gland. I've got, in this case, about a 1.5 centimeter cushion to shoot through. The balloon would be disadvantageous, so he doesn't get one. He was the first patient we treated, so we did what we call adaptive CT or repeat CT in him every week. And ran a bunch of plans, and we just wanted to make sure, for example, that dose of the prostate was regular, and it was. We did an MRI of him every week as well to analyze the spacer. First one, wanted to make sure the spacer wasn't shrinking, and it didn't. My routine when I have patients with the spacer is to do an MR every week for the same reasons. I want to make sure the thing is staying stable. Now, there are a lot of special situations that come your way in the proton world as well. Some of them are pretty simple, some not. I'm starting to see an increasing number of patients who have undergone radical prostatectomy, and they may or may not have had radiation. Their PSA goes to 0, and then starts creeping up, and we're like, well, what's going on? And 5 years ago, we didn't know what was going on. But now, courtesy of, for example, C11 acetate PET CT that Fabio Alameda is doing out there in Phoenix, you can often find out what's going on. This was a gentleman I treated about 1.5 years ago. He had his radical prostatectomy, and everything looked good. His margins were negative, stage T3A, so he capsular extension, but the margins were clear. His PSA went undetectable for 3 years. He did not have post-op radiation, but he had a C11 scan that showed a couple of positive regional nodes. Medical oncologist said, we'll put you on hormone therapy. He didn't want it, so let me try just treating the nodes. Actually, Mark Scholl said, why don't I treat the nodes? So here's a C11 acetate scan, and there's this little hot spot here. His prostate would have been about here. That's his bladder. What's that? So what we were able to do is fuse the C11 scan with planning MR and planning CT and delineate the lymph nodes that were the site of the recurrence. He had some recurrence here in the right internal iliac node. You don't see those large nodes on the left. And if I can see it, I can hit it. So in his case, we just used a single field, came in from the back, high dose around the nodes was done in 20 treatments, and we spared the majority of the sigmoid colon, and we spared everything that was anterior to the nodes. He's about 1.5 years out now with an undetectable PSA. We'll see how it goes. A lot of post-prostatectomy patients. I think with the robot, we're seeing more positive margins. Rates for using protons in those patients, the same as it always is, spare normal tissue. A fair number of patients that I treat who've had hip replacements. Unilateral hip replacements are pretty simple to treat because you just, as you see here, you don't shoot through the steel hip. You come in from the opposite side, from posterior. The problem we're into with bilateral hip replacements is that there's a lot of loss of the CT signal, and you can get difficulty figuring out exactly what's going on in the center of the pelvis. We now have some special software that GE has come up with that actually can process a lot of that artifact out. We use that all the time. Patients who have other bowel problems that are contraindications of radiation, like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, you find that protons are ideal because you can not hit those tissues. For example, if a gentleman has ulcerative colitis involving his rectum, that's a darn good candidate for a spacer. And if you don't treat the rectum, you won't hurt it. Crohn's disease is small intestine, and you'd have entrance and exit dose with x-rays. We don't have that. Also, prior radiation treatment. You see a lot of it, because we're getting good at curing people. I'm treating a gentleman currently who had radiation to his pelvis in 1983 for cancer of the rectum, and when he underwent radiation and surgery, he now, 30-odd years later, has a prostate cancer that cannot be operated on because of surgical scarring. So he's getting radiation therapy at our facility. There's always going to be a debate between protons and x-rays until we get to the point, I think, and we're getting there, where the cost to the payer, person writing the check for the treatment, is no different. I think we're very fortunate at Scripps in that we now have, we had for about a year, with 2 of the larger insurers in California, Blue Shield and Cigna, we have a contract saying we can treat with protons, non-Medicare patients, we can treat with protons because we were able to come up with a way to do it where the cost to Blue Shield or Cigna was the same as the cost of IMRT. And they were very straightforward about that. They said, we know the technology is good, we believe the treatment works, we just don't like paying more for it, okay? That takes it from being a medical issue to a contracting issue. That's not with everyone. Blue Cross and Aetna and United haven't taken that attitude yet, but we're always going to have this debate until we can get cost out of the equation. We've gone from 1 functioning proton center in 1990 to 26, with about another 10 scheduled to open in the next few years. The biggest difference we're seeing is that the machinery is getting less expensive and becoming a lot smaller. You can now buy a 1 or 2 room proton center. One room is about $25 million, so it's not cheap, but it's a lot less than $150 million, $200 million to build a 5-room facility. And this is bringing the machinery into the reach of your community hospitals and smaller medical facilities and such. And I think, rather than beat up on poor Anthony, because I beat up on MNF, let's get to the end here. There are also a lot of complaints I hear sometimes about, why do you want to treat prostate cancer with protons? You should use it on kids, only in these esoteric cases. We can do both. When you have a high capacity facility, you don't have to make those tough choices. I was fortunate, I was at Loma Linda when the project got going. For about a year, we had 1 room. That was it. Only 1 room was operational, and we had to sit down every week with a list of potential cases and prioritize. That was not a lot of fun. So you could treat 10 patients a day, you treat kids ahead of adults, you treat curative ahead of palliative, but you've always got 100 people that you could potentially treat and you only had room for 10. So when you have a higher capacity facility, that doesn't become an issue anymore. But there are a lot of reasons also for looking at prostate cancer as a way to advance your treatment. It's a common cancer, so you see a lot of it, right? You don't have to worry about taking 20 years to get a large series of patients. You've got an easy way to follow up results, PSA, which is much more accurate than doing imagery. It's much more sensitive. And there aren't that many critical structures you got to worry about. Just 2, really. Other parts of the body, you got 10 to 12. So you can be very creative, and you can get some pretty quick feedback over how your treatment is doing or not doing. In summation here, I think it's pretty clear if you look at NCCN guidelines, they agree with me that we can use protons to cure prostate cancer like we can use x-rays, like we use surgery, like we use brachytherapy, you name it. We have lots of evidence that it works every bit as well as these other techniques. There's certainly some superiority in terms of the side effect profile, which is true of radiation in general over surgery. We're still trying to figure out the optimal dose and dose per fraction. We're still trying to figure out the best way to optimize our treatment. That's medicine, we want to do that. For the last 2 years, I've gone from, for most of the patients, I've gone from treating over a 2.5 month span to 5.5 weeks. Why? Because there were 2 randomized trials that showed that you could do this and you had exactly the same outcome and no difference in the complication rate. And you're saving people, 2.5, 3 weeks or more of their life. Why not do it? So that's what we now do for the majority because it was proven in clinical trials. I think that if you look around the proton world, that everybody is moving to pencil beam scanning, IMPT. Even the facilities that don't have it are trying to retrofit it because it lets you do so much more. It lets you do that intraprostate boosting. It lets you treat the pelvis. It lets you treat the breast cancer patient who needs to have her IMC nodes treated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even in the last 2 years, there's been this very, very strong move toward it. There hasn't been a facility ordered in the U.S. with passive scatter in about 4 years now. And some of the older centers are not retrofittable, they're not retrofittable easily. Most of you realize know that MD Anderson has had a proton center since 2006. I don't know how many are aware that they're building a new one. They are, because they wanted to get pencil beam capability. And their technology supplier, which is Hitachi, said you have 2 choices. We could take about 3 years per room and retrofit it in a machine that was built only 10 years ago, or we could build you a new facility in 24 months, it'll have it all. So they haven't started construction yet, but they've signed their contracts. They're going to build a brand new proton center next to their existing one. University of Florida is doing the same thing. For the same reason, their facility also opened up in 2006, not very retrofittable. So that's where the future is going in this technology, in proton treatment. And as I was going on about a few minutes ago, a lot of these arguments between protons and IMRT with x-rays, they're based on cost and the limited availability of the equipment. Those are going away. And once those go away, the arguments they will disappear. This was our first day of treatment, February 12th, 2014. A lot of happy people. We finally got the thing up and running. As of today, we've completed about 1,150 patients since we opened up. And that's been a big mix of cases, adult and kids. Prostate's probably about 40%, but there's everything else, from head to toe. And that's a trend that I want to continue. This should be used for more than just a single diagnosis, and we are. That's again a picture of the lobby. That's all I have to say. I'd be happy to answer a few questions, and thanks for paying attention.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi. I will pass the mic over to whoever would like to ask a question, and there's Larry.
Thank you for an excellent presentation as usual. I think this is your third time here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
3 questions. How does Proton now compare to IMRT in terms of cure rate?
How does Proton compare to IMRT in terms of cure rate? If you give the identical dose, it's identical. I blew through some slides that I talk about that. If you look at patients who get IMRT and are getting the same radiation dose, equivalent of 80 gray or greater, the numbers are the same. The thing you run into with IMRT is that because you're treating more normal tissue, in many cases, certainly not all, people pull their punch somewhat. But I think, again, if you give the same dose, the impact on the cancer cells, no different. It's a difference in what the normal tissue has to see to get that dose into the target.
But if everything's equal, you're able to give more radiation to the patient with Proton B, is that correct?
Well, if everything is equal, what you're actually doing is you're giving less radiation to the patient, the total radiation. There's a calculation that we do, you'll see it in papers called integral dose, total dose to normal tissue. If you look at a Proton plan and a high technology X-ray plan, that dose to target is the same. It's the area getting 50%, 40%, 30% where there's this huge difference. And that's where a lot of the debate lies. People say, well, that dose is unimportant. Which to me is shorthand for that's not my body, so I don't care. Because if you look at what we talk about as being low dose in IMRT, for give you a quick example, if we're giving 80 gray to the prostate with IMRT, you're going to give 25 to 30 gray or 2,500 to 3,000 rad to the intestine, which in the context of what you're giving to the prostate is low, but in the context of what the rest of the world thinks of as low dose, it's not there. I mean, 3,000 rad is literally 3,000 pelvic CTs. It's about 1 rad per pelvic CT. Or as Steve Frank from MD Anderson likes to point out, that low dose you're getting in your pelvis is curative for a lot of other cancers like lymphoma. So that's what we're able to eliminate or vastly reduce.
Gotcha. You indicated that you have 3 types of scanners.
Yep.
When would you use PET over
Over MR, all 3, yeah. So in our imaging center, again, I'm spoiled. I've got wide bore CT, I've got a multiparametric MR about 5 meters from it, then we have a CT PET. And for prostate patients, we aren't using our PET scanner very much yet because we're not ready yet to do the oxygen scans. I'd love to do C11. I think C11 is great. I keep asking Fabio to please build a place out in California. The only drawback to C11 is the isotope has a half-life of 20 minutes. So if you don't have a cyclotron on site to manufacture it, you can't get it. Where I use PET scanning currently is primarily in lymphoma. We use it in breast, we use it in head and neck, and we use it in a lot of the kids. And what we do is we'll do a PET scan and an MR and a CT, and we put all those image sets together because they'll all show you different things. And lastly, it doesn't work well in prostate because there's a lot of physiologic washout, but when you radiate somebody with protons, you create PET agents. And they don't last very long, but one of the things you can do, and I've done this in a couple of seminoma patients, is we'll radiate a person, and then we'll briskly walk them to the PET scanner. We'll put them in it. We're not giving them anything. We're just taking advantage of the fact we created a little bit of F18 when we radiated them. We'll get an image. And what we'll do with that is we'll use that to map, to verify the dose effect. You say, oh look, here's this dose cloud, and we did a PET CT, so we have the CT part to map the dose cloud onto their anatomy. And it's a nice way, you don't use it too much to adjust things as much as it gives you a warm fuzzy that, yeah, the darn thing's actually doing what you think it's doing.
Can you conceive when you have had the opportunity to work with PET to a longer extent in time, where it would have some advantage over MRI?
I think it's going to be complementary in the sense that where I see PET's greatest use and where I'm using it now is in lymph node mapping and lymph node treatment. MR is a much better tool for showing you with high resolution what's going on inside the gland, because you can give you that 2-3 millimeter nodules. You know, with PET, it's kind of a blob. But what PET is good at, and this is where I love C11, and you know, a lot of other countries, they do gallium-68 on everybody, is that you get a map. You go, look, that lymph node is hot. So, and I deal with this every day. I'll say there's a person with advanced disease, Gleason 8, PSA 20. We get them get a C11, or now they're getting these other studies because they become available, the PET studies. We take that data, we put it into our planning system, and if there's a lymph node that is hot on, or nodes that are hot on that scan, I'll boost them just like I boost the stuff inside the prostate.
So what kind of tracer are you using with PET?
Which tracer are we using with PET? We've used a variety. There are several that are used for prostate imaging. Carbon-11 acetate is a very good one. I've had probably 25 patients from Fabio that over the last couple of years. Carbon-11 choline, I've had a few from Mayo Clinic, not too many. What I'm starting to see now are patients from UCLA and UCSF who are having, as part of a protocol, they're getting gallium-68 PSMA, which is yet another PET agent.
Sure.
And I've had 2 patients from City of Hope that have had Oxman, which is the F18-based agent. You guys are probably aware the FDA approved Oxman in certain it's approved in certain situations for post-operative patients with rising PSA. That means that they're going to be seeing a lot more of that. We will be able to do that study at our center. We're just waiting to get Scripps Radiology. They have to go through a bunch of steps with the NRC to be able to do it.
Which tracer has the greatest promise?
Which tracer has the greatest promise? They're all pretty equal in my mind. They're fairly complementary. And I've asked Fabio that question. He said it depends what you're looking for.
Okay.
They all can show disease. If you got a PSA of below about 0.4, they all get the resolution tends to be poor unless you've got a person with a short doubling time. But beyond that, if you look at, and there's some good papers comparing them all, they're pretty darn equal. So then it comes down to the ability to actually get the material. The nice thing about the F18-based study is that every cyclotron facility, PET facility in the country makes F18, and it lasts for 90 minutes. So they can make a batch in the morning and they can send it around town. So maybe C11 is 5%, has 5% greater sensitivity, but you can't get it. You reach for the one that you can get, which is still pretty darn good.
Thank you.
Sure.
Further questions? Yes.
If your proton therapy kills cancer cells, why do we have to wait 3 to 6 months before we have any idea if it's...
Yeah, so proton therapy or radiation therapy kills cancer cells. Why do you have to wait 3 to 6 months? Or actually, why do you have to wait 3.5 years, which is the average time to PSA nadir after high-dose radiation? The reason has to do with the way that it kills the cancer cells. And normal cells for that matter. When you radiate living tissue, you create injury in the DNA. You cause DNA breaks, single and double-stranded breaks. And to some extent, those breaks are repaired. In fact, what separates a malignant cell from the normal cell is that malignant cells are somewhat less able to repair that injury. However, that injury is not expressed until that cell attempts to replicate. And if you look at the replicative rate of prostate cancer cells, it's amongst the slow, I think it is actually the slowest of all malignancies. So you have cells that you radiate, and they may not even try to go through a division for a couple hundred days. So until those cells attempt to grow and divide, they're still alive, happy, making PSA and all that stuff. And then they try to become fruitful and multiply, and that's when they realize their blueprints are screwed up, and that's when they die. And this is why in patients who have not received hormonal therapy, you see essentially a parabola, PSA dropping. Conversely, what if I'm treating a lymphoma patient, which I do a fair amount of, where you have cells that are doubling, that they're trying to cycle every 20 to 30 days? Guess what that means? That means that I'm scanning them. Well, actually, with the cone beam CT that we have, we're able every day when we're imaging them for treatment to assess the target volume. And you start seeing changes in their lymphoma in a week, and then you change your plan. Because those cells are trying to cycle so rapidly that in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, enough of them die to where the tumor will shrink appreciably. And those patients, this is another thing, that's not like I'm banging the drum for pencil beam, but it's just, from a clinical standpoint, it's made my life a lot easier. When you're treating patients with rapidly responding tumors, which are primarily things like lymphoma, it can be lung cancer, head and neck cancer, a lot of pediatric stuff, you have to be able to adjust your treatment to reflect the change in the tumor configuration. When I used to do that up at LIU, what would frustrate us, and me in particular, is that even though we would image a patient and we would see that thing had changed, there was about a 1 week lag between when we did a new plan and the machine shop spit out the new blocks, and they had gone through quality assurance and we could use them. So what I had to try to do was kind of guess, okay, well, it's gone from this to this in a week. I won't have my new plan out for another week, so I'm going to make my devices even smaller. So you're always fighting this battle of being behind. With a pencil beam scanning system where you're not having to manufacture physical devices to shape the beam, you can turn a plan, right now we can turn a plan around in 24 hours. So if I see something's changed on Monday, we'll have a new plan on Tuesday. And where this is going, and this is probably within the next 5 years, not a little sooner, we're going to be one of the, since we're Variant's first proton center, we get all sorts of cool stuff that we get to play with it. They're developing a way to replan a patient in real time. So in other words, you come in, we put you on the table, we do a cone beam CT of you on the table, that goes into the planning computer, it looks at your anatomy on that day, it says, oh no, you're 2 millimeters different than you were the previous day, and the prostate's not quite the same position. I'm going to just generate another proton scan pattern, and we'll do that in 10 seconds and treat you with that. So we're going to. This is being pioneered. Variant has a facility in Denmark that they're doing this work at, but we're going to be rolling it out on a test bed basis, probably the next 24 to 36 months. But since you're not having to wait to build the device to physically shape the beam, you can do this. That's kind of a long way from why you have to wait so many months to a year to know what's going on with prostate cancer, but it's just kind of fun to talk about.
President, yes.
What are the criteria to be a candidate for proton?
What are the criteria to be a candidate for proton treatment? They're essentially the same criteria as for X-ray therapy. They're no different. Think about it as it's not like something special. We're just reaching for different modalities. So if a person is a candidate for X-ray treatment, for prostate cancer, you like to say at least 10-year, depending on what we're dealing with. But for most things, if we want a 10-year life expectancy, then protons are an option. For higher grade disease, you don't worry about stuff like that. You treat because you have to treat. So it's on the table. Anytime X-ray therapy is on the table, if you're treating localized cancers, where it's not used, if I've got a person who's got 15 or 20 metastases, there's no reason to do it. In fact, that's probably be better served with a radionuclide like radium-223.
Two more questions.
Sure.
What is the treatment regime in terms of time, length of time, and also only certain insurances are covering that now?
Yeah, so the typical length of treatment, if it's intact prostate, so a person with intact gland, I'm doing that now in 28 fractions, so that's 5.5 weeks. It's once a day, 5 days a week. If there's something where I'm treating lymph nodes, like that plan I showed you, that was a 20 fraction plan. So that gentleman was in and out in 4 weeks. And I've had a couple where the lymph nodes were smaller, I've gone even faster with 3 weeks or so. That's become my standard because you have 2 randomized trials. One was in the US, one was in the Kingdom, saying that those regimens, 4 to 6 weeks, are as good as 9 weeks. In fact, the NCCN guidelines reflect that now. And then insurance coverage, it's all over the place. So if you start with Medicare in California and Washington, because the same intermediaries for California, Washington, and Arizona, has been covering proton treatment as medically necessary, not, well, you can only use it for this diagnosis, but medically necessary, since February of 1991, so over 25 years. If you look at individual insurers, they all have their own policies on what they will and will not cover. So I mentioned a little earlier, Blue Shield and Cigna contract now with Scripps saying we'll cover proton therapy of prostate cancer. Virtually all insurers cover it for kids. And I had a great fight with one who, at 22, because they use 21 as a cutoff, had a 22-year-old lymphoma patient referred to me from the University of Arizona, and I had a bitch moment. We got her treated, but at age 22, she became miraculously radiation resistant. So now she's an adult. If you can look online at the insurance company's policies, and they'll say, hey, usually it's like under age 21, under age 18. We don't want to know. Just do it. We don't care because we know it's you're treating so much less normal tissue. It's better. But then they start playing and they break it down by site. So for United Health, for example, they cover proton treatment of eye tumors. They cover proton treatment of tumors of the base of skull or spinal cord. They'll cover some patients where they've had prior radiation. That's about it. Others are far more broad, but they change. Usually it changes every 12 months. So we have, like every proton center does, a staff of people that not only keep track of this, but help with the appeals process. We do a lot of appeals. We do a lot of things where we'll treat a patient saying, look, we think you're a good candidate for this. You've had prior radiation, etc. And we're going to go ahead and treat you. And if we'll appeal later. And if we lose, we lose. We're not going to come back after you. It's an eternally shifting target, and it can be. I waste a lot of time, as do the rest of our staff, writing medical letters, sending papers, referring to literature. And the reality is that the best thing you can do if you're a patient and your insurer is denying it is to raise holy hell. And I've had far more patients over the years, sad but true, get approved because they have threatened, or in many cases taken legal action, than I think I ever have by saying, look, here's 10 papers, peer-reviewed, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you pay attention to them? You can always pick and choose what you review, and people do. So Medicare is the easiest because they've looked at it twice in 25 years, and both times said, yeah, all you do is treat less normal tissue. And now that we're able to do these treatments in a shorter time span, the cost differential between this and IMRT is far less. In fact, 28 fractions of protons versus 45 fractions of IMRT are pretty much equal. No difference.
More questions?
How would you compare the impact of healthy tissue, proton versus seeds?
Good question. Impact of healthy tissue, protons versus seeds. I think that a well-done seed implant is as good as anything else out there. If you look at the radiation dose outside the prostate, it's lower with seeds than with protons, because protons have to come in from the skin, and you're giving some dose on the way in. The key to the implant is there's a lot of geometric stuff with the size of the prostate, but really, not surprisingly, it comes down to the person doing it. The biggest difference you see in patients who undergo brachytherapy versus proton therapy, it's not a difference in the cure rate, and I showed that slide where we did that comparison just using Mass General data. It's a difference primarily in urinary complications. You tend to get more urinary, irritative, and obstructive symptoms with the implant because of the mechanical irritation of putting the seeds in. That's the biggest difference. I don't see any difference in preservation of potency. I don't really see any difference in rectal bleeding, which is pretty low now either way. But you do have more urinary symptoms. But you look at what Peter Grimm was doing for 20 plus years. You look at his data. It's as good as anything that's ever been accomplished by anybody with radiation or surgery. But he was a guy who was doing several hundred implants a year, and he was doing them very consistently. And he died far too young. Mr. Blackburn, yeah. The microphone's coming over. So.
Yeah, Bob Markini in his latest proton thing, Bob mentions about a new type of thing beyond pencil beam or something. It's like an RFQ or something like that. I don't know what the terminology is, where they try to do I don't know what it is.
I read the latest letter. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure what it is either. It's hard to think of what the next step's going to be. That the if the RFQ stands for, is an acronym that stands for radio frequency quadrupole.
Yeah.
That's
I
part
thought
of.
they used that in
Yeah.
radio frequencies.
At the Loma Linda facility, the RFQ is the device that in effect pumps protons into the synchrotron so that they can be accelerated. I think what he's getting at is that there's been a project that started about 2000, 2001 at Loma Linda to develop a pencil beam scanning system for LAU, because we all know the benefits of it.
Right.
And at LAU, they have a research room. There's 4 patient treatment rooms. There's a 5th room that has a couple of beam lines that go into the research. And in early 2001, 2002, they had the first iteration of this. And it's never been taken to the point where it can be used on people. And one of the reasons is it has to do with the synchrotron that they use. It's called a slow extraction synchrotron.
Okay.
Cyclotrons, like most proton centers use, it's a continuous beam. So if you want to do beam scanning, it's perfect. You take so you've always got particles, and you just attenuate them and then use that batch to scan a layer. With a synchrotron, you've got to inject into the machine. You have to accelerate. It takes about 3 seconds at LAU, and you get a package of protons and you put them into the patient. That was one of the things futzing them up, is that slow extraction time meant that if you're doing pencil beam scanning, the patient treatment time would stretch into several minutes, which is not good. You want to do this because people move and the like, you want that precision. So one of the things they've been trying to do is develop a better injector, because that's one of the rate-limiting steps, and I think that's what he's talking about. They're really struggling with trying to bring pencil beam scanning online there, because 30-year-olds, literally that equipment was built at Fermilab, and it was built beginning in 1988. And they're facing the same issue, if not more so, that Florida and Anderson are facing. And if they ask me, and I got asked about this when I left, and the dean was in there, I said, you guys need an upgrade.
Yeah.
It's obsolescent. It doesn't mean you can't do good work there. It just means that the technology, it's like taking a 30-year-old airplane and trying to, you can modify it to some degree. Like the Air Force does it all the time, but it's not quite the same. So we had one of their physicists visiting us about 2 months ago at Scripps, and we were asking him, what's the status of pencil beam scanning at LAU? And he said, we had started to take one of the rooms apart. They shut down gantry 3, and they were going to do all this, because they had to do a lot of hardware installation, and they stopped it and put it all back together because they're not ready to go yet. And I don't see them having it anytime soon, so it's frustrating, because they need it if they want to continue to advance. Especially if you want to treat the pelvis, you want to treat the pelvis or any of these complex shapes. Passive scatter isn't that good for it.
I even remember reading a few years ago, I even asked Bob Marchini, because I grew up in Massachusetts, and there's a little town called Still River.
Yeah!
And
it's
near a town called Harvard. Harvard and the University of Harvard are like 40 miles apart. But it's Still River, this little town. There was a guy that was trying to make one to fit in a suitcase or something.
What you're referring to is that there was a company that used to be called Still River Systems.
Yeah.
It's now called Mevion.
Mevion, okay.
It was founded in part by a physicist from MGH named Ken Gall, and Mass General. And their goal, which they have achieved, was to make a proton unit that would fit, a single room center, that would fit into a vault, which isn't that much larger than a standard linear accelerator vault. And what they had to do to accomplish this in part was they had to take that, I showed you our machine is 3 meters, 3.2 meters, 95 tons. It's a 3 Tesla magnet for that cyclotron. They have a unit, an accelerator that, and I'm not that big, I can get my arms around it. It's a 10 Tesla, very, very powerful superconducting cyclotron. It's mounted on a gantry. It weighs about 10 tons. It can't do a 360, but you can do a fair amount with it. It took them a long time to get their first installation. Their first facility, it's at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis. It took them approximately 4 years to go from installation on that facility to first patient treatment. There are, there are at least two others that are operating in the country. I think one is in Florida, and one's at the University of Oklahoma. What Mevion does not have yet is a FDA-approved scanning system. So they are currently the only manufacturer that is exclusively passive scatter. They're working on it. They have this product called Hyperscan. You got a good name, but it's not. They haven't got their FDA approved. They will. But yeah, this is one of the reasons that the cost is coming down. But as a, once again, that the consumer tends to win when you have competition in this marketplace. So Mevion develops the single room facility, and then you have Varian and IBA and Hitachi saying, well, heck, if you could do that, we can do it too. So Varian now has sold a number of single room centers that are in essence that same cyclotron with one gantry. So you have a full 360. And they think that's where most of the future of the U.S. is going to be. I think they're right, because now you bring that price from $200 million to $30 million, and you can start to see where it becomes pretty darn affordable. There's a lot of stuff in medicine that costs more than that.
Are you going to be going up to Orlando to the Proton?
I don't know. Right now I'm not sure because it's the NAPT meeting. Yeah, I haven't signed up for it yet. I should probably go. I've been there in a couple of years, but I've got that. I've got there's a PTCOG, Proton Therapy Cooperative Oncology Group meeting that I'm supposed to go to in a couple of weeks.
And then you're going to be up at Schultz's thing there.
Yeah, that's at the end of March, and then in early March, I have to go to Beijing to give a talk because there are a number of proton centers opening up in China, both home, nice homegrown designs, and some of the other vendors. So
Loma Linda runs that in Hong Kong.
the Surun Sha, yeah. No, the Chinese are going big guns into proton and heavy ion therapy. They have 4 or 5 operating centers now, and they're building a bunch more.
Any further questions?
And yeah, Mr. Blackburn, I'll get you.
So, what kind of presentation would you recommend just taking out the prostate, and how would age be a factor?
Okay. So when I recommend surgery and when is age a factor? In general, the cure rates again are equal between radiation and surgery, in my opinion. I think the patients that are best served by surgery are, in some respects, those who don't want to worry about having the gland still in their body. I mean, that's a pretty significant psychological burden. And the other thing you get with the operation, this is again something you present to a patient, say, look, if you want to get the most prognostic information based on pathology, you take out the gland, hopefully somebody takes out some lymph nodes, which hardly seems to happen anymore. You have better information from a prognostic standpoint. The downside is the side effects, and you paid a big physical price to get that information. In terms of age, oh boy, you're going to find papers saying it makes a difference. You're going to find some, including one I wrote 8 or 9 years ago, saying that if you use 60 as a cut point, it doesn't. I think what's more important in determining prognosis is Gleason score, PSA, and clinical stage. But you will see the younger guys getting surgery, and I think one of the reasons they consider it, early 50s, is that radiation is again the gift that keeps on giving. And even though we have some data now from Mass General suggesting that there's a significant decrease in the second cancer rate between proton patients and similar patients who were treated with X-rays, there was a publication back in 2013. It's still not zero. And with surgery, there's actually a slight increase in second cancer rate with the operation because you've got scar tissue and there's remodeling and that can lead to malignancies. But it's significantly less than with radiation. With what I do, I tell people it's about a 0.5% to 1% lifetime risk. So that's a reason to consider surgery. It's just that, it's the same debate we have in breast cancer. Do you do mastectomy? Do you do lumpectomy with post-op radiation? When people have looked at that one and they have it in a randomized fashion, the cure rate is identical. But there are a lot of reasons that people pick one or the other. I want the breast off, I want breast conservation. You let the individual decide. I think most surgeons too, they also look at comorbidities. Have you had heart disease? Are you a good operative candidate? You start looking at the patient's condition. And you start to see an upper age limit. But again, that's not absolute, it's relative. Most urologic oncologists get pretty reluctant to do surgery beyond the mid-70s, but you'll see people who have it. It just depends on the circumstances.
Dr. Rossi, we thank you so much.
We have one more.
Oh, one more?
Well,
One more?
we-
There's always one more, yes, all
Very
right.
patiently.
There you are.
Thanks.
I want to clarify a couple of things first. You said you got it down to where in about 28 sessions is still at about 8th grade.
Yeah, so the treatment course at this time is 28 fractions, and it's the way that I prescribe that is the entire gland is going to get 70 gray, but at 2.5 gray per day. Biologically, that is the equivalent of 80 gray at 2 gray per day, so 40 fractions. In addition, because I can use the MR to help target, I give a simultaneous integrated boost to anything I can see, like I showed you guys. And that area is getting 77 to 78 gray in 28 fractions, which biologically is like 90 gray in standard fractionation. So there's an equation that we use to do these equivalents, and that's what we do.
Okay. You mentioned Mayo Clinic is doing the C11 choline.
Yeah.
And I'm familiar somewhat with Dr. Kwan's efforts there and Dr. Almeida over in Phoenix. It appears to me from what I see that the choline may be superior, and you kind of glossed over that.
Yeah, it's that's good. Is C11 choline better than C11 acetate? Is it better than our gallium-68 or F18? What I've seen, and I've talked to people who do this stuff, and I've read a couple of the review papers on it, is that they're probably all pretty darn equivalents. I mean, I think it comes down as much to the person doing the interpretation as it does to the actual agent. They will all show disease, recurrence, say, in the prostate bed, lymph nodes. There may be some differences in sensitivity at showing other soft tissue and bone sites, but it's not uniform. So, for example, C11 may do a better job of showing lymph nodes throughout the body, C11 acetate. C11 choline may do a little better job of showing other areas like within the axial skeleton. But the differences are pretty minimal. The biggest thing it hinges on is the availability of the isotope, and that's where having now, you've seen what the radiopharmaceutical companies have done, not surprisingly, is that what can we do with standard isotopes, things that have longer half-lives, that are already in use in PET imaging? How can we link them to some other molecule that will help us target? PSMA theoretically should be the best of them all, because that's looking at a surface antigen that you're going to find on these cells, and it works pretty well. But it also has its limits, because since it's an antibody-based test, some of it ends up in the spleen, liver, and bone marrow. So you can have activity there that gets masked by the normal activity in those tissues. What's going to really help sort this all out is when we start having the ability to do these tests on a large scale, then you're going to start to see if any differences shake out. And right now, we just aren't that many places that are doing any of this. That even with the FDA saying that the F18 is okay, it's still going to be the better part of this year before we start seeing a lot of that.
Okay, one last question. I have a friend, a young lady, who diagnosed with breast cancer, left breast, and found out that it's very close, if not sort of attached to the chest wall.
Uh-huh.
And, so the radiation scheme that they had planned for was scrapped, and I wondered if that was something that is amenable to the pencil beam.
Yeah, so your question is, you had a lot of individual who had breast cancer, it was deep, it was up there against the pectoralis muscle, chest wall, which means you're going to treat the heart. Yeah, the short answer is yes. Can you treat that with intensity, with pencil beam scanning? Yeah, we do it all the time. And that's a really good application for it. And what we often have to do, and this gets back to one of the questions about insurance coverage, is that we'll have an insurer say, show us the plan. So we'll do a comparison. We'll do a Proton, IMRT plan, Proton plan, Intensity-Modulated, Proton plan, and we'll do a high technology X-ray plan, and we'll show the difference in dose to lung and heart and other critical structures. And we have some metrics. That's part of the problem, is having numbers that we don't really know right now beyond mean heart dose, what is the best metric for measuring risk of heart injury. But we have probably 2 or 3 patients at any one time under treatment in that exactly that situation.
Thank you.
Could you tell, what are the side effects of Proton using, less, was, you said 22?
28. So what
Versus the more?
Sure. Is there a difference in the side effect profile when you accelerate this, when you do, say, 28 fractions versus 40 to 45? Yeah, there can be. The difference that you see is that the gentleman, 2 things. With the 28 fractions, they are somewhat more likely during treatment to have urinary frequency and urgency. So it's not uncommon for me at all to say, all right, we're going to put you on ibuprofen, maybe Flomax, keep you on that for a couple of weeks after you're done, and that's that. Because we're giving a bigger slug per day, so we're irritating the gland. Conversely, since they're only getting 28 balloons versus 45, they have less rectal irritation. Take your pick.
What about the cure rate of one versus the other?
The cure rates are the same, and there have been 2 big randomized trials looking at this, but a number of non-randomized trials are looking at this because biologically, what you're doing is giving the same dose. You're just doing it 2 different ways. So when you look at radiation effects on malignancy, it's not just the total dose you give, it's the dose you give per treatment. So if you're giving 28 treatments at 2.5 gray per day, biologically that's identical to giving 40 treatments at 2 gray per day. And the reason this also works is that it turns out that the bladder and the rectum are less affected by increasing the size of the daily dose than the cancer cells are in prostate cancer. This was all elucidated by a radiation biologist, a guy named Jack Fowler. And it's becoming the standard in prostate treatment. The only guys that I'm usually not using it on are either gentlemen who have very significant urinary symptoms pre-treatment. So I have to do the test, a little paper test, and if they have an AUA score of greater than 25, I'm not reluctant to do it. Or if they say I want to be treated over 8 to 9 weeks, I'm fine, I can do that. But everybody is moving in the direction of shortening the treatment course. And to take this a couple steps further, at the Northwestern University Proton Center in Chicago, they have a randomized trial of 44 treatments, 9 weeks, versus 5 treatments in 2 weeks. It's essentially a CyberKnife type approach. And they're going to find out when the patient this accrues and they publish the data, if it turns out that 5 treatments in 2 weeks works every bit as well as 44 treatments in 9 weeks, and side effects are no different, why the heck do you want to stretch it out over 9 weeks? Or it's already to the point where if you open up the NCCN guidelines for prostate cancer, it came out in December last year. You look in the radiation therapy section, it says modest hypofractionation, treating over, it says 4 to 6 weeks, so that's 5.5 moles right in there, is perfectly acceptable alternative to conventional fractionation. And it says extreme hypofractionation, which is this idea of doing it in 1 week, maybe, we don't know yet. That one's still being investigated, but the data on shortening the treatment course somewhat is very solid. We do this on a lot of things that we treat with protons. Most of our breast cancer patients, it's 10 fractions, 2 weeks, especially if you're doing partial breast. Lung cancer, 10 fractions, same thing, 2 weeks, 7 gray per day. Why? A lot of data supporting it. US data, Japanese proton data, US proton data, Japanese proton data. So we try to do this because you can shorten the treatment time. It's all to a person's benefit. As long as you're not hurting anymore, why waste a month? Why waste 2 months?
Does the machinery that administer have to be improved in order to shorten it?
Nope, they use exactly the same equipment. So you don't have to do anything to the machinery at all.
So I guess if it's working for SBRT.
Yeah. Well, you can do SBRT with protons. That's stereotactic body radiation therapy. The only reason that SBRT isn't being done with protons at the moment is a billing reason. If you look at the billing codes for SBRT, yeah, how about that? But actually, I got a little caveat. If you do radiosurgery, so anything above base of skull and up, You can do that with protons, and that's covered. If you try doing some other parts of the body, it isn't, because you look at the billing codes for SBRT and they specify either gamma ray based or LINAC based. There are a number of us that are working with Astro and the AMA to get protons added into that, because there are a lot of situations where we could do a much better job of SBRT with protons than you ever could with X-rays. Now the exit does. So it's just a question of getting an amendment, additional language to a billing code, just like, and I don't want to belabor this, but when we started out with pencil beam scanning in 2014, if you looked at the proton billing codes, they all say you've got to shape the beam with a physical device. And we're like, oh crap, what do we do? So we had to go to the CMS and say, we're no longer doing that. We're shaping the beam electromagnetically. Oh, okay. So we had to get amended language into the billing code. Otherwise, we were afraid that someone would come back and say, you said you treated this person and you made a physical device, where is it? Well, it's data, it's ones and zeros in the computer. But those are the kind of things you have to do sometimes to get the technology changes faster than the more mundane things.
Any further questions of Dr.
You
Rossi?
guys have been real patient, so let me wander down these roads. Thanks.
Well, Larry has another question.
To address this gentleman's question, there is some information online, okay, and I think it was provided by Dr. Fabio that suggested that if you compare the choline with the carbon acetate, when the PSA is over 2, they're about equal. But if the PSA is less than 2, the information, the statistics indicates that the acetate is more sensitive.
That's the one he has?
Yeah, he's doing C11 acetate. We're going to learn a lot more about this, because you're going to have 300 facilities doing prostate PET. And one of the ways that, for part of this approval, part of the reason they approved the F18 oxygen is, like when they did, like for all PETs, like we do sodium fluoride PET. When I order a sodium fluoride PET CT for bone imaging, I have some very, very simple forms to fill out, where there's a pre-scan form that I fill out saying, here's what I'm going to use, here's what I'm looking for. Basically, Medicare saying, we want to know why you're ordering the test. Because they're going to use that, not to say, you're a bad boy. They're going to say, we're going to use this to help try to figure out who benefits from it. So you fill out a pre-scan form, here's what I'm interested, here's why I'm ordering it, and then you fill out a post-scan. It takes a minute. And the question it asks is, how did the scan change your management, or did it? Did the results change what you're going to do? They'll be doing exactly the same thing, because I've done a couple of these on protocol for F18 and for PSMA and Presbyterian. So we're going to get a lot of data really quickly on how these things are working. Right now we're talking about, if you look at most of the data on the C11 acetate or choline, you have very few sites that have ever done those studies, and there's just not a lot of results out there. That's going to change.
Thank you for watching our video. If you would like to learn all the most current prostate cancer information, we have many YouTube videos on our website at www.prostateforum.org. We also have meetings the fourth Thursday of every month where you can talk to mutual survivors. You can also ask personal questions to the doctors and the speakers after the meeting. Remember, when us men hear the word cancer, the big C, our brains turn to mush. We think we're about to die. Come learn where there's hope and information at the Prostate Forum of Orange County.